Today on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, we're going to discuss the plan that I have to help my son become more frugal and wise with money as he grows up. We're also going to discuss why it's important that you don't put off having your budget meeting at the start of the month. For our listener question today, we're going to discuss 401k rollovers and the difference between Roth and traditional retirement accounts. Lastly, for our main topic, we're going to be discussing an article that was published by The Hill. This article dives into the dependency between adult children and their parents, financially and relationally. What can we learn from this article so that we can develop healthier boundaries in our families? Be sure to listen to the end to find out. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. Recently, I saw on social media that there was a show that's been deemed recently to be the worst show to ever be made or something along those lines. It's the Scooby-Doo reboot, the one called Velma. I think it's an HBO show, but I'm not really sure. I just know that it's gotten a lot of hate. I know that it's gotten a lot of inappropriate material that's gone through it. But there was something that caught my eye in the posts that I saw. The character Fred, as they remade him in the show, emphasizes the fact that he's had everything done for him as he's grown up. He's sort of like the spoiled rich kid who can't mature fully so he can be a functional adult. And what I saw of the show, I haven't watched any of it, and I'm not vouching for it, and I don't recommend you go watch it yourself. But from what I saw, Fred is so inept when it comes to functioning, he can't even cut up food for himself when he's eating. Well, this is obviously a very ridiculous and absurd commentary when it comes to children who aren't able to function for themselves. It's based on a tiny kernel of truth that sometimes we can do too much for our children, and if we do too much for them, then it prevents them from being able to learn and grow and mature so they can be functioning adults. There's a balance between doing stuff for your children in order to help them and letting them figure things out themselves or guiding them to make wise decisions. And there's no place where I think this is more important than personal finance. Raising children that can be financially independent and financially healthy in their adult lives is very important, not only for their financial futures, but for yours as well, in the relationship that you will be maintaining with your child. Because this is something that's really important to me, I wanted to share with you, if it's something that is also important to you, what I plan on doing with Oliver as he grows up so he can be the best version of himself when it comes to managing personal finance. The plan I have for him, I call 401 Kid. 401 Kid is inspired by 401k just because the method that I want to use to help Oliver build good savings muscles is to match his savings effort in order to incentivize him to save for things that I think are wise. I'm not going to be providing a match for him for things that I don't think are as important for him to be saving for. Let's say in his teen years, he wants to save up for a car. He may only be 1 year old now, but I want to make sure that I approach this when the time comes with intentionality and purpose. He wants to save for a car, hypothetically speaking. Cars are relatively expensive, and it's important that he has something that's reliable, and I think that saving for a car is going to teach him to save up for a big purchase, especially automobiles, as opposed to going into debt or seeking an auto loan. Because I support the idea of saving for a car, I will offer him a match, up to a limit, that I will then apply toward that purchase of the car. Say he saved $5,000, I would put $5,000 down and he could go buy a $10,000 car. But I need to put a limit on it. Let's say he got massively ambitious and managed to get a rather impressive job and racked up in his teen years $40,000 that he wanted to put towards a car. There's no way in my personal budget, at least the way that I know it now, that I could put $40,000 to match. And I absolutely see no reason why a teenager's first car needs to be an $80,000 behemoth of a machine. That's just overkill. And I don't think it teaches the economical element of frugality. I think by putting a limit on it, it also restricts as to how far I'm willing to help, because I think that instead of buying the car with all the bells and whistles and all the wants, it's going to be better for him to stop saving for that car at some point and start directing his savings goals to something else, taking into account opportunity cost that is inherent to his financial future. Namely, I would like him to seek higher education in some way that could lead him down a path for a career that he wants. This could be trade school, it could be a 4-year degree, it could be a master's degree, it could be a PhD. Either way, I want to be helping him with that. That's something that he could be saving for even earlier. As soon as he gets the notion of saving, and I want to start helping him build savings muscles, I can introduce him to this 401 kid program and say, if you save $1, daddy will save $1. Mommy and daddy will take that $1 and we're going to go invest it for you. We'll have an educational savings account for Oliver, where if he puts money toward it and he says, I want to save this for college or I want to save this for school, well, then we can put $1 toward it and that money can then grow. In this way, in this exercise of 401 Kid, we can not only teach him how to build savings muscles, but teach him about investing and the time value of money, getting him exposed to that from an early age and discussing money in a way that helps it become just a natural part of his thought process as he figures out how to be a functioning adult. Money, on the whole, is a relatively taboo topic. I know that among my friends, it's not something that naturally comes up as a conversation point. It's not water cooler talk. However, discussing finances, discussing personal finance with children is one of the greatest indicators that they're going to be financially successful and financially independent in their future. So it's important to have these discussions with their children and provide them with the natural context where these discussions can grow and help teach them how to manage money in a successful manner. I don't know exactly what my limits are going to be when it comes to helping him save for a car, and I'm not exactly sure what they're going to be when it comes to saving for his future education. I'm probably, for the education part, going to look at what the contribution limits are on an educational savings account and say that our match that Amanda and I put forward, could be equal to 50% of that limit. So he puts forward half of it, we put forward the other half, and he can max out the contributions for educational savings for the future. There's one more thing I should bring up on this topic that's really interesting. The Secured Act 2.0 was recently passed in the last year, and in the Secured Act, there is now law in there that says that you can take an unused 529 and roll it over into a Roth retirement account after the child, the beneficiary, is done going to school and has unused funds. This means that if you have someone that you save for, a child that you save for, and they don't use all the money, say they just didn't go to school or they had a large number of scholarships, and because they had so much scholarship money, they didn't need to use all the 529 money. Well, now the money that you saved toward college, be it an ESA, which can be rolled over into a 529 or a 529 straight up, that money can now go toward retirement for your child in a Roth account. It can be rolled over into a very powerful way to set them up for a healthy and stable financial future way down the road. You're going to know that they can retire with dignity if you have enough money in there that doesn't get spent on education and gets rolled right into that retirement. That's something that I really, really wish was available when I was of college age, but it's something that I'm incredibly grateful exists now for the sake of my son. I hope my plan is one that can help inspire you as you pursue your child's hope-filled financial future. Now it's time to cover today's budget tip. Today's budget tip is don't put your budget meeting off or writing your budget more than a week into the month. A normal month is only going to be, 30 days, right? So if you wait a week or so, about a quarter of the month is going to pass by and you will not have had a budget to be directing your decisions in that first portion of the month. The longer you put it off, the more decisions you make that can't be informed by your budget. The more decisions that you're making on the fly as opposed to having made them on paper on purpose in advance. The more of those decisions that you make, the tighter and tighter your actual budget is going to be restricted. And it's possible that you spend so much on a particular category that you make it that you have to pull money out of savings for that given month and have a negative savings rate just because you overspent enough categories within that first week to basically make it impossible to budget for just your four walls and come out ahead. Having a plan for your money is going to touch every part of your decision-making throughout the month. And I'd much rather prioritize having that plan to help guide me as opposed to having my decisions force me into a plan that I wouldn't have intentionally made had I prioritized the budget meeting. This is why I say on the last day of the month or the first day of the month that you're writing the budget for, you need to reconcile your old budget, see how you did, look at the good, the bad, the ugly, figure out what you need to push to save. You also then need to be looking at the next month, figure out the budget, make sure it's zero-based. Your income minus all of your spending, saving, and giving equals zero. If you do this and you prioritize it before the bulk of the purchases, before too much time gets away from you, you're going to have an easier time staying on track and be much less likely to run into situations where budgeting feels A, pointless, and B, unhelpful, just a stress. Now it's time to answer a question submitted by you. Today's question comes from William. William asks, I am rolling over my old 401k after changing jobs. Should I convert the traditional funds to Roth? That is an excellent question, William, and I'm very glad that you asked it. Before we dive into answering your question, I want to give a little bit of background on 401k conversions for the sake of everybody listening. When you leave a job and you have a 401k or a 403b, you probably had traditional funds in it. There are options out there to have a 401k that includes Roth money or a Roth 401k. But these options are not available at every employer. And even if you are investing your contribution as Roth, your employer is probably investing their match as traditional funds. Reason being, that's the way that they get a tax break. So let's back up. The employer contribution is always going to be made as traditional money. So if you leave a job, you go get another one, and you're looking to roll over your retirement monies, you're always going to have a traditional component in there. What's the difference between traditional and Roth? A traditional money is tax deferred. So you get a tax break now. If it's your employer's contribution, they get a tax break now. And you will have to pay taxes when you pull that money out in retirement. If the money being invested is invested into a Roth account, which has annual contribution limits, well, that money is not tax deferred. You already pay taxes on it today. You can't take a tax break when you file your taxes in April. So the money that grows in a Roth account will not be taxable when you pull it out. The benefit of having a traditional investment is that you might think your tax rate in the future or your tax bracket is going to be a lower percentage, so you might be able to attain the income at a lower tax rate. However, if you are younger and you leave money in a Roth account, it can grow to something that is significantly larger than your initial contributions. And paying taxes, even in a higher tax bracket for some situations, can result in paying less taxes overall if you invest in Roth. So there are pros and cons to both. You need to run the math to know which one is going to be the most tax-efficient decision for you. And you shouldn't take, invest in traditional or invest in Roth as blanket financial advice. And in that same vein, this podcast should not be misconstrued as financial advice for investment purposes. Rather, this is purely educational material to help you be the most informed as you are facing these financial decisions. I, as a personal financial coach, do not believe that anyone should make an investment decision that they don't understand or one that they're not comfortable with. So I just want to share information with you to lift the veil for fear of the unknown so that you can understand what it is that's in front of you and you can make your own decision in the most informed and comfortable way for you. So now we have this 401k, we're rolling it over. We need to figure out if we want to leave the money as traditional or if we want to roll it over to Roth. If we roll it over to Roth now, you're going to have taxes due now that come from that. Most financial advisors will tell you that you should have the money to pay the taxes saved up, separate from the money in the rollover, so that come tax day the next year, you don't get hit with a surprise tax burden that, is not something you can accommodate. So first off, you need to know that you have the savings there to make that rollover an option. The other thing you need to do is run the numbers to see what's going to be most tax efficient for you given a projected growth, your tax bracket, and your expected future tax bracket. One other thing I would consider is traditional accounts, because the money is taxed. The government doesn't want you to just leave it in there in perpetuity. they want you to pull it out at some point because that's when they get paid. So they have required minimum distributions on a federal level that dictate, based on your age, what percentage of your retirement that's in traditional monies needs to be pulled out of the account. Roth accounts, on the other hand, don't have required minimum distributions because the withdrawals that you have or the distributions you take from the Roth account are not taxable. So what you want to do in figuring out this required minimum distribution thing is, will a required minimum distribution ever exceed your safe withdrawal rate? A safe withdrawal rate is the amount of money that you can safely take away from your nest egg as a percentage of your initial retirement nest egg value, corrected for inflation, and know that you're not going to run out of money. I made a short on YouTube that I threw out there that kind of covers a study that I did. I plan on investigating safe withdrawal rate studies more in a future episode. But for now, know that there is a safe withdrawal rate that you should be planning your retirement around, that you should be planning your retirement savings around. If you look at your Roth money and your traditional money and say the required minimum distributions as a percentage of my total nest egg at some point is going to exceed my safe withdrawal rate, well, then you don't have control over your withdrawal rate. And you know it's going to put you at a place of higher risk of running out of money than you're comfortable with. So if that's a situation you're in, it might be a good idea to consider rolling the money over from traditional to Roth, at least to the point where you know your required minimum distributions in the future, assuming today's tax law can be projected into the future. It's not, but it's the best we can do. If you make that assumption and you say, well, I don't want to deal with these required minimum distributions, well, that conversion from traditional to Roth, if you can afford the tax burden today, might be wise. One last thing to consider. If part of your retirement plan is to save up as much as you can so that you can leave it to the next generation, you can leave that money as generational wealth to your children, well, you want to make sure that you're leaving it in an account format that's going to best benefit them. If you have your money in a traditional account, they can leave that money in the traditional account for the next 10 years. But when they pull the money out, it's going to have the taxes due on it. If you have your money in a taxable or a brokerage account and it's invested, a non-retirement account otherwise, the tax basis typically resets when somebody inherits that money. But when they get it, the continued growth from that point forward is taxable. And in a Roth account, if you have a Roth retirement account and you leave the monies in that Roth to the next generation, well, they can leave that money in the account for the next decade, just like the traditional monies. But when they pull it out, it's still not taxable for them. So they can get an extra 10 years of tax-free investment growth from their inheritance if you leave it to them in a Roth account. And they don't have to worry about required minimum distributions that might be imposed on them from a traditionally inherited IRA. These are all the things that I would be considering as you're thinking about rolling traditional money over into Roth money in rolling over your old 401k to either your new employment plan or an individual retirement arrangement, an IRA. William, I hope that helps you. If any of you listening find that information helpful but still think that it's a little confusing and want to cover it in more depth and you want to learn more about what you should be considering with retirement monies, that's what I do. Please visit us at our website, HopeFilledFinancial.com. There you can sign up for a free consultation where I'll sit down with you for an hour and we can talk about what your financial plan needs to be in the future. Now on to today's main topic, the article that was written and published by The Hill. For today's main topic, we're going to be covering an article by The Hill. This article is called Parents Pay at Least One Monthly Bill for 40% of Millennials. Now, this article was written in February, and I saw it, and I earmarked it as something that I really wanted to share on the podcast. I think it's very important for us to recognize what the ideal financial boundaries are for us to have in our parent-child relationships. I also think this article can provide a great deal of healthy context for us to have that conversation. So let's begin. The article starts by saying, in a new survey, 2/5 of millennials say their parents still pick up one or more of their monthly bills. And the most common parental subsidy is the largest, housing. 24% of millennials say mom and dad pay their rent, and 17% say parents cover a mortgage. So here you have around 40% of millennials who are having their parents pay for their housing costs. That is not only the largest chunk of what their monthly budget should be, but it's one that I'm sure is causing undue stress to the parents. Smaller shares of the 26 to 41% demographic reported parental help with groceries, 22%, utility bills, 19%, auto insurance, 18%, car payments, 16%, or streaming services, 12%. It's just really expensive to be a young person now, said Kimberly, a personal finance expert at NerdWallet. The cost of housing, of food, across the board, everything is expensive, especially in big cities. It can be a huge asset to be able to turn to your parents. The findings come from a survey of 2,000 Americans conducted by market researcher OnePoll for Chartway Federal Credit Union in Virginia. For young adults, the 2020s have posed one economic challenge after another: spiraling inflation, rising rents, lagging wages, soaring home prices. Amid those challenges, young Americans have blurred the lines between childhood and adulthood. Young adults are staying in school longer and graduating with ever larger loads of student loan debt. They're postponing marriage and a first home purchase as they labor to dig themselves out. I need to praise the article for mentioning that student loan debt is basically putting millennials and those who are graduating now from school behind the eight ball. Rising student loan debt, rising average student loan debt is indeed something that is making it more challenging to afford in an ever more expensive society. Now, just because things are expensive does not mean that parents need to pay for their adult children's stuff. I think this particular economical climate that's described in the article makes it all the more important for millennials, for adult children that are mentioned here, to be running a budget and being frugal with their money. The problem here with adult children not being financially independent isn't necessarily that everything is so expensive, but they're not exercising the financial discipline in order to manage themselves independently in that sort of climate. It is possible. I've seen it done. That is indeed the ideal, and it's something that we'll find out later in the article that everybody is striving for anyway. The article continues here. In 2022, 19% of men and 12% of women in the 25 to 34 age group cohabitated with their parents. The COVID-19 pandemic drove adult children from cramped apartments and crowded downtowns into the more spacious confines of their childhood homes. There is a new timeline for the transition to adulthood, said Christine, a sociologist at Northwestern University. And that's partly because of the increased timeline for schooling, that people need to get a good job. And parents see this, and they are trying to support their children as they are getting more education and getting their lives together. I want to mention here, this is a place where I believe my parents did a great job in raising me to know what my limits were with education, where my limits were with what they would do to support me, and what the expectation was for me moving out and becoming independent. My parents had a rule that I could continue living with them as long as I was actively going to college. They gave a limit on it and said that as long as I was going to college and I was getting good grades, I could stay there. And everything else was going to be on me. I had to pay my car insurance, my gas, I had to buy my own car. Meals, they would feed me if I was at home. But everything else was on me. College, books, tuition, that was for me to cover. So what they basically did is they said, we will cover room and board for you, and you can stay with us because we support your going to school so that you can have a higher paying job. You don't necessarily have to go to school to have a good high paying job, especially if it's a career that you don't want. However, if it's something that you want to incentivize as a parent, you need to simply put an expectation and a limit on it. I did end up staying in school for 6 years. I got a concurrent 5-year bachelor's degree alongside a master's in architectural engineering and a minor in physics. I don't know if my parents had expected me to stay a whole 6 years, and as a parent who will eventually be in the same situation someday, I might put a cap on the number of years. That way I don't end up having an adult child at home for 10 years while they go through law school or medical school. Let's continue with the article. The new survey joins a growing data file on the evolving financial relationship between adult children and their parents. A December survey by Credit Karma, the personal finance company, found that 31% of parents support adult children financially, either by allowing them to live in the parental home or by paying some of or all of their bills. A significant share of parents said that they still pay their adult children a monthly allowance. Okay, paying a monthly allowance to an adult child or covering their bills is effectively doing two things, in my opinion. One, it's separating the association of work and money, basically giving a sense of entitlement to the child. And this is going to be true when you're raising a child, or if you're continuing to give an adult child an allowance. You're basically building an association and a dependency. The healthiest family relationships that I know, especially those with adult children, are those that are based on the individuals involved in the relationship being completely independent, self-sufficient adults. If you have a dependency between two family members who should be independent adults, you end up putting a poison in the relationship that changes it in a way and not for the better. An unhealthy dependency can break down relationships in a way that's ugly. And I don't want that for you. So if you're in a situation like this is a situation where dependency is being perpetuated, and it's one that should be broken for the sake of the parent's pocketbook and the overall maturity for all individuals involved as we grow to become more independent. Independence allows the relationship, the family relationship or the friendship, to flourish in a way where the relationship is fully and wholly a decision. It's one that you get to choose. Just like having a nest egg that's healthy enables you to go to work because you choose to, because you want to, not because you have to. If you have a dependency in the relationship continues because it has to, not because it's a free choice. And I ask you a question now. If love is not a free choice, is it love? Is it a loving relationship? The article continues. Another survey by consumer website savings.com found that fully half of parents with adult children provide them at least some financial support. Of that group, the average parent reported spending $1,000 a month on adult children, covering everything from rent to food to tuition to travel. Most of today's young adults seem to accept parental support, not out of desperation, but simply because it is available and because they believe the parent can afford it. Just because it's available doesn't make it right. However, if you were to offer me free money, despite the relationship, I'd probably take the free money without even thinking about the consequences to the relationship. This is a place where money can build an unhealthy dependency, while the decision behind falling into that dependency seems like a no-brainer mathematically. I mean, it's free money. Let's continue. When the One Poll survey asked millennials why parents cover some of their expenses, the largest group, 30%, chose the response, "They haven't told me to pay them myself." Another 26% said it was because it was cheaper to stay on their parents' tab. A smaller group said because they are financially comfortable. Only 12% said they could not afford to pay the bills themselves. This dependency that's growing out here, unlike what the start of the article said, is not primarily because everything is so expensive that millennials or adult children are not able to pay for things themselves. They can most likely afford it, and even if they say that they cannot afford it and they need the help, well, engaging with a frugal budget, a written plan for their money, can put them in a position where they can figure out how to make ends meet. It's not a matter of if you can make ends meet, it's a matter of how. Let's keep going. Streaming services may not be fond of allowing adult children to share a subscription with their parents, but the broader notion of leaning on one's parents for financial support seems to have widespread acceptance in 2020 society. Because it's so common, it's nothing to be embarrassed about, and it's nothing that you should feel like you need to hide, Palmer said. Even so, most millennials seem to desire financial independence. A large majority told One Poll they plan to cover all of their own bills within a year or two. For most parents, supporting an adult child is the very essence of parenting. I disagree, but anyway. But doing so can be costly. One NerdWallet analysis estimated that parents who choose to cover a child's expenses into adulthood sacrifice as much as $227,000 in lost retirement savings. Clearly, The potential cost of supporting a child into perpetuity has some parents spooked. Footing the bill for adult children, one AARP article asks, how to stop for your good and theirs. Now I agree with that. Breaking this dependency, which is mutually desired and mutually beneficial for both, is indeed for the good of both involved, parent and adult child alike. Let's move on. A Pew Research study found that a majority of American adults believe parents do too much for their adult children. Agreed. Pew also found that 2/3 of American adults think that children should be financially independent by 22. Yet, only 1/4 of adults actually achieve independence by that age. In a recent Credit Karma survey, 2/3 of parents who support their children said the effort causes them financial stress. Many aging parents face debt and inflationary pressures of their own. Financial planners say parents should budget their own expenses before they offer to support an adult child. This is just like putting your oxygen mask on in an airplane before you help a child. You need to make sure that you can breathe, that you can function, so that you can successfully help them. If you help them and they are a child who cannot function on their own, let alone help you put your mask on, well, you might end up passing out, and they may not end up keeping their mask on at all. Same goes for the situation we're talking about here. Let's continue. The parents should be taking care of themselves first, said James, president of the Financial Planning Association, a trade group. What I would recommend is that parents make sure that they are taking care of their own finances and are saving for their own retirement so they won't run out of money in their own lifetime. If the numbers don't add up, experts say, it may be time for parent and child to have a difficult conversation. Even if the numbers don't add up, seeking independence for the adult child who has an unhealthy dependency on their parents is probably going to be best for everybody. But it's going to be especially important to have this conversation if the numbers aren't matching up for the parent and they are sacrificing their dignity in retirement for the sake of covering the streaming service for their adult child. Set an expiration date or a deadline for the adult child to take over the bills, said Courtney, consumer financial advocate at Credit Karma. Set the date and then be willing to engage with your child. The typical young adult wants to be financially independent and have a path forward. It's just been so hard, especially for this demographic. So yes, in the end, the adult children who are dependent on their parents want to have financial independence. They may not have the plan to get there, but they know that they want to be there in a year or two, sort of kicking the can down the road. You ask them at any point, it's probably going to be a year or two for all of them, no matter how long they've been dependent on their parents. And for most parents, it's going to be financially advantageous for them to be able to break away from being a dependent provider for their adult child and allow them to become independent on their own. It's going to help them grow and mature with money. In the story that I shared today, in the way that I plan on raising my son, I want to put an emphasis on leading him to a place where he can be immediately financially independent when he graduates from school. Or if he decides to not go to school, I want him to be able to strike out on his own and be financially independent in very short order. I'll probably end up giving him a deadline, just like they recommend in the article, and say, at this point, you are on your own. I will help walk with you and help you develop a plan if you have questions, but you need to be able to work that plan on your own. That should be a key goal for parents who have young children now who aren't grown. And if you're in a situation where you are the adult child, you're dependent on the parent, and you want to break away from it, well, it is so vital for you to sit down and do a written plan, figure out what it is that you need to do in order to basically support yourself and be financially independent from your parents, then bring it up to them. And tell them that you want to work on being more financially independent for your well-being and theirs, and here's the process that you see to go, and you can give the deadline. You don't have to wait for your parent to bring it up. The number one reason why adult children say they are still dependent on their parents, according to this article, was because the parent just simply hasn't cut them off yet. And if it's genuinely true that you as the adult child want to break away from that, well, you can make that choice and you can lead that communication. It may not ever feel like it comes down from your parents. They may not feel like it is a loving thing to do for you. However, because independence fosters a relationship where love and relationship is indeed a free choice, it helps the relationship flourish. It helps love flourish. It helps free the relationship up to be better than it possibly could be with a dependence. If you're one of the parents supporting an adult child, you need to know that it's not unloving to pull your support, your financial support, away from them and encourage financial independence. You need to do it out of a place of love, though. You need to say, this is what's going to be best for you. It's going to be what's best for me. In either situation, what you need to do to relieve this sort of problem is sit down and just be brutally honest, but also sincere and vulnerable. You need to say, I love you, and I think this is what's going to be best for both of us. This is why. These are the reasons. And I want to work with you on steps so that we can both be financially independent of each other. It's going to be the best thing for our relationship. It's going to be the best thing for our financial boundaries. It's going to be the best thing for our futures. And I want to leave you with the hope that there is a brighter future and a more beautiful relationship on the other side of having that hard conversation. I hope today's podcast was helpful for you and that you enjoyed listening. And if you did enjoy listening, I hope that you subscribe to the podcast and support us and continue listening to us in the future. Until next week on Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.